The question is, when we're talking about modifying future probability using a really focused intent, and we're operating out of inanimate objects where the rule set can be subject to statistical probability, like the airflow experiment, for example.
Mm-hmm.
When we use intent to look at outcomes, a lot of people focusing on visualization of goals, dreams, desires, that kind of thing. And a lot of the way that they manifest in some ways has to do with other people, other players in the game, having played certain roles or interacted. My point being, when you bring in something outside of an inanimate rule set and you start bringing in people that then are subject to free will who seem to have played a role in supporting that, is it down to them being kind of freewheeling and therefore being subject to a higher level of coherence that you're broadcasting? If they're kind of in the default film extra role in your movie? Or how would that work? Or is there a little bit more depth if I'm explaining that right?
Yeah, no, it does work. You do affect other people. You know, if you have, let's say, like my friend Dennis Menerick, he would always create a parking place for himself. And we worked in a building that was just downtown, which means there was no place to park. And he would be very successful that when he got there, just as he got there, somebody would back the car out, because if they backed it out 30 seconds earlier, somebody else that was cruising around looking for a parking place would get it. So he got to where he was about 80 to 90% effective in having a parking place for him when he needed one. So, of course, that had to affect other people. So what he was doing was changing the probabilities of the way things work. So we talk about uncertainty, right? The reason that the airflow thing worked was because there's uncertainty in, the pressure in that air at a small level. Okay, well, there's uncertainty in what people might do. There's lots of uncertainty there. So there's somebody who's in one of those office buildings downtown there, and they're thinking that they need to leave now and go home because they're expecting, somebody to visit. So they need to go home. Now, whether they go home right then, 10 seconds later, or a minute later, that's pretty random. It could go any of those ways. So if Dennis has this intention that a parking space show up just as he gets there, well, these are all the uncertainties. There's lots of things in motion, lots of people, lots of parking, and lots of people needing to go and other people coming, looking for places. And in all that uncertainty, what he's done is he's changed the probability that all of it will just work out such that when he gets there, there'll be a parking space. So it does affect the choices that other people make. So his intention may make somebody say, oh, gee, I didn't know it was this late. I better run out and get in my car and go home. And just as they do is when Dennis pulls up. The probabilities change. And as those probabilities change, it affects the whole system around you. When you use your intention, it's not just a precise line that just affects that thing. If there's multiple things at play, it affects everybody. And people have nudges. You might call them nudges, but it's not so much that somebody's giving them a nudge. Oh, you need to go home now. That the system's out there giving people nudges to help Dennis get a parking spot. It doesn't work like that. But it's just that the probabilities change in such a way that Dennis will get that spot. And those probability changes are just all over. So people will feel, I guess, that gradient. Maybe you think it that way. There's kind of a gradient that makes up a person's mind, whether it's time to leave and go get in their car. And that gradient, if it's a little steeper, they'll go there a little sooner. If that gradient is a little flatter, they'll maybe dally around and do something else. So Dennis's intent changes those gradients a little bit. Doesn't force people to do anything. They can do whatever they please. They have free will. They don't have to do anything. But in as much as they're kind of on automatic, just kind of doing what feels right, then that gradient's now a little steeper, and it's time just so they'll get to the car and pull out just as Dennis pulls up to that spot. So yes, it does affect others. affects all sorts of things, particularly if what you want or what you're trying to manifest can only take place with a whole lot of people and things involved in it. You know, it's got a lot of structure. Well, that'll take more energy because you've changed things. But yes, that does work that way. You do affect other people, not by forcing them to do something, but by just making it easier for them to do it this way rather than that way. That basically is a field, talking about all these gradients that kind of help you slide one way or another. Well, you know, that happens all the time. You know, when there's a crowd forming and the police come in and say, all right, everybody disperse, you know, everybody has to leave now. Well, that increases the gradient for people leaving. People start thinking about leaving when they get that. And it's not just that they intellectually get the words that it's time to leave now, and it's an intellectual process. At an intuitive level, they're also getting that thought that sticking around may not be such a good idea. You know, maybe there's going to be some violence here or something else that I really don't want to get involved in. So they pick that up on an intuitive level. And on that intuitive level, people then start to walk off. Not just because they intellectually process the words and are obedient, but because they've got this sense of maybe it would be a good thing to do to go elsewhere. And if you think of how words and things affect how people think, or even the weather, you know, when it's been raining for 3 days, you know, it changes people's mindsets. It changes their moods. It changes how they approach life, you know, as opposed to whether it's a sunny day or so on. So there's just lots of things happen in our environment. One of the things that is really creating a lot of problems now in our culture and in the world in general is that there's so much fear in the world, so much fear out there. And because there's so much fear out there, guess what? It's easier for us to be fearful because there's so much fear out there. That's the collective consciousness connection. And in a collective consciousness, you affect it a little because you're just one person among a large collective, but it affects you more because you're just, you know, you're a member of that collective consciousness. So yes, we are affected by other people's thoughts. You know, it comes to mind that some years ago I was reading about, you know, all the people that worked at IBM, you know, and they all had to wear blue shirts and this and that and the other. And people would come in and they wouldn't buy into that. They'd be wearing their white shirt and their khaki pants or whatever. But, you know, 6 months later, a year later, and they're still working there, guess what? They started to wear blue shirts because everybody else did. You know, so what other people think affects your mind and affects how you think and affects the choices you make. So it's not that there's determinism out there and that Dennis is somehow forcing people to give him a parking space. He's just changing the probabilities such that it's more likely that all of that random stuff out there will end up with him having a parking space. And that does affect other people.
Thank you, Tom. That's it was what I was thinking. I think that just to clarify one point, if I may, is the ability to influence somebody else's choices correlated to the level of what I would call them not having a strong grip on their own reins. Yeah, as a sleeping awake.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. People, and again, it goes back to randomness. People who don't have a strong grip in their own reins tend to be more random in what they do. You know, they do things on very slight whims, or they just happen to feel a little this way or that way. And it could be this way or that way. It's about equal. You know, they could go any of 4 or 5 different ways because they don't have a tight grip on the reins. They're not focused on where they're going and what they're doing and how they're going to get there. So they have a lot of uncertainty in their choices. And where they have a lot of uncertainty in their choices, well, those probabilities of what choices they'll make will shift a little bit. You know, that they'll be influenced by that collective consciousness to do one thing or another. So yes, the people who are more or less unaware and unconnected, particularly the people going through life as zombies, you know, who aren't really focused on anything, just kind of drifting through life, those people are very easily manipulated by by others. Those who are very focused, it takes a lot more effort to manipulate them because their free will says, nope, I'm going here and I'm doing that. And to try to get them to go anyplace else or do anything else is not easy. You'd have to change a whole lot of probability to get them to see it some other way. Whereas if somebody's got a lot of uncertainty in their choices, you don't have to change much. You just change it a little bit and they'll kind of, like a gradient, they'll kind of slide off in that direction.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Final clarifying point on there, if I may. If you're seeking help from the LCS over and above just the level of probability, one would imagine that that would tie into the nature of the outcome you're trying to manifest, whether it serves the greater good or whether it doesn't. Because you usually manipulate versus influence, should I say, one being more sort of contributing, one more egocentric. So that was just also a little clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. When we're talking about the nature of consciousness and how consciousness communicate with each other, basically, how they connect, collective consciousness, how we are persuaded or in a field of energy that's kind of nudging us this way and nudging us that way, that's can be used for good or for bad. You can have people manipulate others just to get their money, to rip them off. And that's a very bad thing. It's a high entropy thing. And you can have other people helping change other people by just giving them a more positive viewpoint. Well, that's a good thing. And if you're asking the LCS for help, then it needs to be toward a low entropy outcome where the LCS isn't going to be interested in giving you any help. But without the LCS being involved, you can use your intent for good or for evil, to help or to hurt. You can not only heal people with your mind, you can hurt people with your mind. It's just the nature of consciousness. It's the way consciousness works and how it interacts. And yes, if you do have a tight grip on the reins, as you say, and you are aware and you are focused, then it makes it very difficult for anybody to make you ill with their mind. You see, that gives you protection because you're aware, you're alert, you have focus, you have purpose, and that lowers your uncertainty. You're not just uncertain, not just a cork bobbing around on an ocean going this way or that. You have direction, and now you're very hard to manipulate because of that.
Thank you, Tom. Very, very helpful. Appreciate it.
INMBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our newly created Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.